You're listening to Nostalgia Club, the podcast where we look back on our favorite childhood stories and revisit them as adults. At least one of us hasn't read or watched these series, so we also get a first-timer's opinion. Spoiler alert, we will be discussing storylines and future events beyond the first books and episodes, so proceed with caution.
Greetings, listeners. Pay attention, for we are about to spin a tale of woe, misfortune,
and Nostalgia Club. Hi,
Wow.
I'm Jino. And joining me are
Michael.
And Victoria.
And today we're talking about the book series, which has also been turned into a movie and a Netflix television series. Television show.
Streaming series.
And has been turned into
TV.
a Netflix. A series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket, a real person.
Yes.
Oh, quote unquote.
I've read these books, but not all of them.
Wait, you've read some of these beforehand?
Yeah, I read some of them beforehand.
Well, hold on. Let's get something straight. Victoria read all of these as a child, as
Yes.
a small being.
I did.
As a little bean.
As a little bean. Just like Sunny. No, I was not reading when I was Sunny's age.
Gino, do you mean like you read them when you were younger or something?
I read some of them when I was younger. A number between 4 and 8.
Okay.
I remember plot points up to 4, and I remember the covers up to 8.
Gotcha. And there are 13 books in the series.
Yes.
13 books, the luckiest number.
There are also 13 chapters in every book.
What a coincidence.
Incredible
Wow.
planning. Some would say it's a little
unfortunate.
Whoa.
Oh.
Ooh.
I consummately avoided these books when I was younger, but we'll talk about that after getting into more vibes.
I'm very excited. So we read books 1 and 2 just for the sake of this podcast, but potentially we might do some more follow-up episodes about the same series because honestly, books 1 and 2 just barely scratch the surface.
I would hope so if there's 13 books in the series.
That's true.
We should definitely clarify, while Gino and I read the first 2 books in the series, or in my case, audiobook to them, narrated by Tim Curry, by the way, which
Excellent.
was really awesome.
Excellent. My favorite video game actor.
Space!
Victoria made a point to reread the entire series.
Well, I didn't make it through the entire series. I endeavored to reread the entire series, but there are 13 books, and I do not have 13 books worth of time to read. But I made it through to book 6, The Ersatz Elevator, which I might say it's potentially one of my favorite books in this series. When you get later on into the series, there starts to be a lot of planting of clues about Count Olaf's backstory, about things that are going on outside of the Baudelaire's scope of view.
Maybe we'll learn about what those funky eye tattoos mean.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, maybe we should talk about who this Count Olaf and who these Baudelaires are. What is
Yes.
this series of unfortunate events?
The story follows 3 siblings, the Baudelaires. There's Violet, Klaus, and Sunny. Violet is 14 at the start of the series. She turns 15 later on. Klaus is 12, and Sunny is a baby. She's literally an infant. But each kid, of course, has their own little quirk. Violet loves to invent things. She spends most of her time thinking up inventions, ways to solve problems. She ties up her hair with a hair ribbon, and that's when you know that she's actively thinking about inventions and problems. Klaus is very smart as well, but he's more book smart, where he loves to read. He has read almost all of the books in their family's library, and he's always looking for more books to read. He has a very extensive vocabulary. Oftentimes, when the other siblings don't know the definition of a word, he will be the one who steps up and defines it for them, which also serves as very good learning for the reader to learn new vocab words. And then Sunny is a baby, but she
Likes to bite things.
She likes to bite things. She has 4 very large and sharp teeth, which is hilarious. I will say Sunny is my favorite character. The way that she speaks in the book is she will say a word, well, not a word necessarily. It's more like
Some
sounds.
kind of...
Pooba!
Yes, she will say
Gak.
some baby talk and gibberish, but she's actually saying something, well, we are told that she is saying something far wiser beyond her years.
The author, quote unquote, the sort of author Lemony Snicket, who is really sort of a character in his own world that also inhabits the world of the story, it seems, frequently addresses the reader multiple times throughout the book.
There are many asides to the audience. There are also many tangents where Lemony Snicket will suddenly grow despondent and distraught over his own personal backstory. So we get little hints and pieces of what's going on in his life. But mostly his goal is to chronicle the lives of these poor orphans because, yes, their parents do perish in a fire at the very beginning of the series. But before we get into true plot summary, Michael, Jino, what did you think? What were your vibes?
Well, as I said, I dedicatedly avoided reading these books as a kid, mainly because I would see like the cover of the books and it would seem a little
unfortunate.
Well,
miserable.
It would definitely, you know, you got these kids and there's some nasty looking man craning over them.
They seemed gothic.
Very gothic. And I was not into that vibe when I was younger. I don't go to books to be put in like the dark, dingy situation and maybe to experience tragedy. It can happen in the course of events, but you know, I would gravitate toward the book that's like, oh look, a young knave in some quasi-fantasy setting and a mysterious rider galloping past. I was less inclined to go to, this looks like the cusp of industrialization Britain, but not quite, and everything is gross and dingy, and here are these kids, you know, because when I was when did these books come out? Like
between 1999 and 2004, I believe.
Yeah, so like what, if I was in like second and third grade around that time, and I saw particularly literate students with these books in class, eager to gobble them up, naturally I would ask, what is that? Is that a good book? And I would get the response, yeah. And I would ask, what's it about? And they're like, oh, well, it's about these kids whose parents die in a fire, and they get like terrorized by Count Olaf, who's like their relative, but not really, because he's after their fortune. And a bunch of horrible stuff happens to him like over and over, and it's really sad. And I was like, oh, I don't want to read that.
Yeah, that's very valid.
And, well, I'm glad to finally be reading it now because it is one of those, it took off. It took off in a big way, and it's become a bedrock series for a lot of people, including, I guess, a number of Victoria's friends, for whom Victoria has kept in mind in preparation for this episode.
Hello, Victoria's friends.
Hello, dear friends. I'm sorry if I have any inaccuracies in the discussion today. I tried really hard to study.
I am not sorry. Place your blame on me.
But I'm happy to be reading these books, or have read a couple of these books now, because they're really good books.
They're are.
Oh my gosh. I can't even, it's extremely entertaining. The humor can be a little dark, but really the humor is more so absurd humor.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of humor to be had in the absurdity of adults that should recognize something is very obvious, that don't recognize something is obvious, to the grand misfortune of these children who are just doing all they can to not be at the mercy of their sinister relative who is after their family's fortune. Those were my vibes. I had a great time, and we'll get into details after plot stuff. Jino, how about you?
I read/listened to these books in audio form when I was a child. My mom would give them to me and put them on in the car when we were driving to school. And I really liked them as a kid. Now, I again read the first two books yesterday and today, this morning, and I actually found it kind of difficult to get through them. I think for a similar reason you, Michael, found it difficult to get into them in the first place as a child. Because I, like you, Michael, want my escapism content to be wonderful and blissful and fantastic, and I don't want to think about miserable things. I want to live a wonderful life in a castle or a coffee shop. But no, terrible things over and over again. And it's not like we're given glimmers of hope that perhaps a nice thing will happen down the road. We're reminded repeatedly that this is a series about terrible things, and they will continue to happen up until the very end.
Yes.
And so partways through the second book, I sat there like, I mean, it's just going to suck for them more. Man, all right, I guess I'll keep reading. Because it's hope, right? It's the thing about the series is that there is no hope, and yet the three Baudelaire children must hold on to it no matter what.
Yes.
And Lemony Snicket is there with a giant hope hammer, destroying every last fragment of it again and again and again, reminding us it's a series of unfortunate events. It was a little dour for me, though I will say, again, I really did enjoy the world building, I enjoyed the writing style, and I enjoyed that gothic dark humor. It's gothic. You don't find gothic children's literature.
Yeah.
Frequently, if at all.
It's very fun, but also very depressing. But Lemony Snicket makes it a point to, like Jino said, to tell you that there is no happy ending. And if you are not down for that sort of book, then you should put it down and not read it. Because you're not going to be pleasantly surprised at the end when the Baudelaires get away from Count Olaf or overcome their circumstances. It's just going to be bad the whole time.
Oh, it's like a Greek tragedy.
Yeah.
It's like the Odyssey, except at the end, they don't go recover their kingdom. They just waddle away alive.
Well, I do think there is something to be said about the fact that you know what the ending is going to be right at the start. I mean, you don't know the specific circumstances of what will happen at the end. However, you have an idea that it's not going to end well, and it might not be a particularly satisfying ending for you. However, there's still a reason why this book series became so popular and so well loved, despite its tone.
Yeah, Lemony Snicket will distinctly, and I'm thinking of the second book in particular, tell you when something disastrous is going to happen. Or he won't tell you exactly when, but like Jino was talking about, like he'll say, things are going well right now, but this one specific thing is going to happen and it's going to make everything really bad.
Yeah.
And you're just like, well...
Like, we all know reading this, and I think you know too, that this nice character will die.
Yeah.
And me reading it goes, oh, well, okay. Cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I was taking some time here to try and look up a nice comprehensive definition of like Gothic stuff as art or architecture, but that's way more complicated. Gothic encompasses a lot of things, so it'd be, I think, a bit of a fool's errand for me to try. But you understand, listener, when everyone here talking to you says Gothic, you just kind of get an idea of that, don't you?
Dark and spiky and ominous and shadows and bats and also a vague sense of where we are technologically and a vague sense geologically as well. And are the animals real? No, none of the animals are real, but maybe some of them are?
Yeah.
What's going on here? Where are we?
There's like a vague sense of like some sort of permeated radiation throughout. Like things are regular, but a little different in ways that don't quite seem quite normal.
The laws make sense, but don't really. And
Yes.
the people make sense, but don't really.
Yes. Well, shall we dive into a bit of plot summary?
Yes, let's. We've determined through our strange bureaucratic process here on Nostalgia Club that I am the one to deliver the plot summary, so...
We will support.
Thank you. I'm the least familiar, but I'll do my best. I'll try and breeze past as much as I can because there's a lot I could go into detail with.
So we read The Bad Beginning, which is book 1, and then we also read The Reptile Room.
Which is book 8. No, it's book 2.
We jumped all the way. No, all of the books in this series have alliterative titles, which is very fun, except for the very last book, which is just called The End.
I saw that on the list and I was like, oh dear.
Whoa.
Ooh, what's going to happen here?
It's the end.
It's not given a distinctly qualifying adjective of some sort. Let's see. Okay, so for The Bad Beginning, we jump right into it with Violet Baudelaire, the eldest, as Victoria discussed, 14 years old, an inventor, very engineering-minded. Klaus Baudelaire, the scholar, yes. I was going to say the intellectual, but they really all are intellectual.
They're all very smart, but Klaus is particularly...
Book smart.
Book smart, yes.
And of course, Sunny, the baby, who likes to bite. The athlete, we could say.
The Chad Sunny.
We frequently get vignettes about their parents after the very beginning of this book, showing how they were so loving and caring and how they would frequently, for example, let their children go to the beach, just take the train to the beach. But it's not long until a family friend, Mr. Poe, arrives to tell the children, well, I'm very sorry, but your parents have died in a sudden fire, and your entire mansion has been burned to the ground. He's described as basically perpetually sick. He's always coughing.
Yes.
And in the audiobook where Tim Curry has to do all the voices, he really gives those coughs like all his effort.
That's awesome.
But like, I mean, when you first hear him, you're like, wow, these are really good coughs. They'll be very exaggerated and like, but then they start to get like very real and phlegmy and bodied.
Yeah.
And after a certain point, I'm like, I'm going to be sick.
Oh, no.
I'm listening to this man cough up his entire lung. So he tells the children, your parents are dead, and it is my responsibility, after a short stay with Poe's family, who are characterized as not terribly neat and not terribly considerate. He trucks them off to a long, distant relative who just happens to be located on the other end of the city by the name of Count Olaf. And there's a wonderful bait and switch where the children arrive at this lovely manor and meet this woman named
Justice Strauss.
Yes, Justice Strauss, who works in the High Court. And her place is beautiful, and she's lovely and so sympathetic. They think they're going to be with her, and we do literally the book equivalent of a whip pan to a house on the other side of the street or next door, and it's just like the most dingy, broken down, slanted thing in the world. And they enter and are met with a very tall man with a unibrow and not much going on in the way of personal hygiene or house hygiene.
He has dark, beady eyes.
Yes, and they're also described as shiny, which is very fascinating. And tattooed to his exposed ankle is an image of an eye. Eyes are very frequently associated with Count Olaf, who has them carved and printed and painted all over his house. Olaf immediately wants access to the Baudelaire fortune, whom the Baudelaire orphans will not get access to until Violet turns 18. And Mr. Poe is very insistent that, no, it will not happen, and no one can access the fortune until Violet turns 18. And as you can imagine, because he is distinctly vile, and Lemony Snicket tells us your first impression of him is absolutely correct, he is the most evil man you will ever meet, it begins a series of events, unfortunate events, in which Count Olaf abuses the children, forces them to make meals for his theater troupe, because he is an actor.
The worst kind of person.
The evil, vile person.
Failed actor.
Well, I would say he is a very accomplished actor.
He seems to have a position of authority among his theater troupe.
Yes.
And plays leading roles.
He's very good at fooling adults.
He's very good at fooling adults, but the children are never fooled. This will come into play in later books, where in every book, Count Olaf is disguised as someone. And because he's an actor, he puts on accents and makes up backstories for himself and puts on costumes, of course. And it's all very hilarious.
The kids are like, that's Count Olaf.
Yeah.
And all the adults are like, who? What? Not this spindly man. Yeah. No, of course not.
It's pretty great. In the first book, they're not trying to flee from Count Olaf or deal with his nefarious schemes. He just has control over them, acting in luco parentis, sort of in lieu of a parental figure. He's acting as their parent. And so he abuses these kids, and he doesn't really give them much in the way of food. He gives them gray gruel. He forwards them a pile of rocks instead of toys. Doesn't really give them any beds. When Klaus stands up to him because he's being absolutely vile, because all they tried to do was make a nice meal for him and his theater troupe at his orders, and Count Olaf threw a fit because he wanted roast beef. Count Olaf even hits Klaus, and it's a very unfortunate thing to happen. After all of this abuse, we learn that Count Olaf has a plan, and his plan is to apparently get these children involved in a play, one of his plays. He's acting suddenly nice to them. And in the play, Klaus and Sunny will play just, some bystanders, but Violet will play his bride. That's the word. I was trying to find it, which is so creepy.
It's so creepy. Count Olaf is so gross.
Yes, it's a play called The Marvelous Marriage, and Count Olaf is like, it's about a very brave, handsome man played by me, and you, Violet, will play my bride in the play.
And Justice Strauss will, quote-unquote, play a judge.
And you're like, I can't imagine what the plan is. And sure enough, the children have to really go to work learning about inheritance law and nuptial law, and eventually they find out that Count Olaf's plan is to, by hook and by crook, trick his way into marrying Violet, a 14-year-old girl, so that he can get immediate access to the Baudelaire fortune. And as happens a number of times in just these two books, once the children learn of Count Olaf's plot, they trot up to him and say, we know what your plan is, you nasty man, and you'll never get away with it. And Count Olaf goes, oh, will I? And in this case, he kidnaps Sunny and puts her in a little bird cage at the top of the tower of his manor here.
The children also frequently try to go to Mr. Poe and to Justice Strauss to let them know, hey, Count Olaf is not a great person, but the adults do not believe them.
Yes. Sometimes it's a combination of just adults being clueless, and then there's also this lovely, when they go to visit Mr. Poe, just like this idea of bureaucratic nothingness. Busy work where Mr. Poe sits at a very boring desk with a bunch of phones and will pick one up and just be like, yes, yes, no, yes, no, thank you. Hang up.
7, 6, 7, 7, 6. Very good.
It alienates you, the viewer, with the children from all of these adults who operate this strange, seemingly nonsensical world. And so the children have to figure things out on their own. Klaus puts his book smarts to use, learning about nuptial law, and discovers Count Olaf's plan. Violet puts her engineering skills to use, creating a grappling hook with some stuff that's around to try and rescue Sunny. But alas, their plans come for naught. Sure enough, it seems that all will be lost, and Violet will have to marry Count Olaf, and it seems like it even goes through with it in the play. Justice Strauss, who is starstruck and just can't listen to reason because she's so excited that she gets to be in a play, reads out the full, ceremonial situation. And Violet says, I do, and signs a paper. And then Count Olaf, much like when the kids find out Count Olaf's plan, they immediately blast it out to Count Olaf as quick as they can. Count Olaf turns to the audience and says, the play is over because this whole thing was a sham so that I could marry a 14-year-old girl.
And Mr. Poe is like surprised Pikachu face.
Yeah.
They're all surprised Pikachu face.
Yeah. Justice Strauss is horrified. She's like, who would have thought that Count Olaf would do such a dastardly thing?
This obviously evil man is evil. What?
We're led to believe that, they've got some kind of trick up their sleeve. And sure enough, the way that they get out of it is that Violet did not, quote unquote, sign the legal document in her own hand, which I'm confused about because the idea is that she is right-handed, but she signs the document with her left hand, which is not her own hand. And I mean, Lemony Snicket kind of... And this is true, I think, for our world, tells the reader, like, this may seem kind of, like, abstract and unclear to you, but honestly, the law is very abstract and unclear. You can get away with some weird stuff.
Well, to be fair, I think also sometimes logic is not the way to win over some of these adults in the story, because Mr. Poe, when he finds out Count Olaf devised this horrible plan, of course he's horrified and disgusted. But then when the children say, well, Mr. Poe, you're the banker, you're in charge of our fortune, can't you just get him arrested? Can't you do something about this? And what Mr. Poe says, well, but you did sign the marriage document, so I guess there's nothing I can do about this 14-year-old girl marrying her pseudo-guardian.
Mr. Poe is the worst.
Mr. Poe sucks. I have so much to say about Mr. Poe, but at that point, when the children are like, but Violet didn't sign the document with her own hand, she signed it with her left hand. Mr. Poe's like, oh, yes, well, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. In that case, Count Olaf, you're arrested. But he gets away.
Yeah. Lemony Snicket, the author, does something here that he'll do in other books as well, which is right at the end, he says, now you may wish to put the book down and think to yourself, everything works out. Count Olaf is arrested for the rest of his life, and the children go to live with Justice Strauss, who says, of course I'll adopt you. And everything works out for the Baudelaire orphans. You can put this book down right now, and that can be your headcanon. And me, Michael, speaking as a personal believer in canon begins and ends where you want. Got called out by this, and I was like, Lemony Snicket, you piece of... Stop messing with my tools to feel good about the media that I read. But he says, that's not what happens, and one of Count Olaf's henchmen basically hits the lights, and Count Olaf escapes, promising to return another day to get access to the Baudelaire money.
Perfect. Perfect Count Olaf impression.
Then, for other legal reasons, Poe being like, oh, well, your parents said you couldn't go to someone who wasn't a relative. It says that Justice Strauss can't adopt them, even though she really wants to and even though the kids really want her to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably saving Justice Strauss's life, honestly.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, she probably would have died. She actually comes back.
Oh.
In later books.
Excellent.
I'm excited.
But for the remaining books, the track record of Guardians staying alive by the last chapter is not great. Olaf gets him.
Yeah, it helps that in this world, Olaf and his henchmen, they're like plans. How they get away with stuff are like clever enough to trick the other adults that exist in this world. Because all adults in this world, except for Count Olaf and his henchmen, are uniformly oblivious and like on autopilot. It's a caricature of honestly real life adults that get stuck in, you know, certain ways of thought or operation. And Count Olaf is, I suppose, a caricature of whatever adults think, how can I make this system work exclusively to my advantage? So the plots of Count Olaf and his henchmen are absurd and wouldn't fly in the real world at all. But this isn't the real world. This is a series of unfortunate events.
Yes.
Book 2, Mr. Poe drives the kids out to the next available relative who lives further outside the city, past like a horseradish ranch. It's described as a very nasty area.
The horseradish is a plant for later books as well.
Ooh.
There's a lot of planting.
I thought you were going to stop at a horseradish is a plant. I was going to be like, yes, Victoria. Yes, it is.
I am the adults in the book.
And I would respond as Klaus, we know.
Yes.
Is horseradish a plant?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
It is a root vegetable.
Oh, okay. Whenever I heard of horseradish, it was always in terms of like some like processed version of it. And I was like, is horseradish
It's
really
because
a
it's
plant?
often used as a substitute for other like more exotic or more expensive like spicy things like fake wasabi. All wasabi in the States, most wasabi in the States is horseradish dyed green.
Oh.
Because real wasabi goes bad practically instantly as soon as you process it. It's like a thick green root and you got to grind it up and eat it right away.
Wow.
And then it just loses all flavor and potency.
Interesting. Well, okay. I knew that there was something shady about like the perpetually green wasabi, but I didn't know that it was horseradish.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not.
No, I feel tricked.
Never getting sushi ever again.
But, right, unfortunate events. So the kids are taken to their next available relative, which is Montgomery.
Who's a herpetologist.
Yes, who studies snakes.
And he's so nice, but he's also very not. Well, I was going to say he's very dumb. He's not dumb. He's very intelligent.
He's a bit self-absorbed, is what I would say.
Yes, that makes sense.
All of the adults in a series of unfortunate events have basically a fatal flaw.
That prevents them from truly helping the kids.
Yeah.
Some of them try, some of them even succeed momentarily, but all of them eventually fail because they're all adults. And that's what this series is about.
Montgomery, or Uncle Monty as the kids call him, is an absolutely wonderful figure. The Tim Curry audiobook, Tim Curry basically does, if you've seen the Wild Thornberrys, Nickelodeon show, Tim Curry plays Nigel in the Wild Thornberrys. He does an accent like this. Smashing. And that's his accent for Monty.
Incredible.
So you get a lot of that. Basically, Monty is like the polar opposite to Count Olaf. The kids are living in a wonderful environment. You know, he shows them around his wonderful estate that he's accrued over time. He's one of the most respected herpetologists in the herpetological community. He shows them to the titular reptile room where he keeps all of his specimens, not just snakes, but toads and lizards and things, all with wacky names and wacky behaviors attributed to them.
This was my confirmation as someone reading the books for the first time in a very long time. Oh, this world is slightly fantastical.
Yeah.
Okay, because the first couple reptiles, I was like, is that real? That's not. No, but it must be. Oh, this one can talk. Okay, never mind.
One of the reptiles he distinctly shows to the kids is a snake that he found himself, a large, black, anaconda-looking thing with shining emerald eyes that he calls the incredibly deadly viper. And the incredibly deadly viper promptly flicks the latch off of its cage and bites Sunny on the chin. The kids are horrified, and Monty laughs and says, "No, it's a misnomer. It's the incredibly deadly viper wouldn't hurt a fly, but I named it that because I'm going to present it to my friends and then prank them by letting it out."
Specifically because they make fun of me for my name, Montgomery, which comes back in the end in a unjust way.
Yeah.
But for a while, the kids are fine. Uncle Monty is great in the sense that he's like the dream of what, like, I can imagine a kid reading this and being like, this is what I would want if I daydreamed about, like, oh, if somebody, you know, if I'm in a bad spot, like imagining some wonderful relative or wonderful person adopting me. His whole thing is like, you know, the kids are like, are we allowed to go in the reptile room? And he's like, allowed? I implore you to go in the reptile room. And he comes up with things for them to do that are uniquely suited to their tastes, not because he's necessarily thinking about what they want to do, but he's just like, well, I need someone to check all of the unique snake traps and make sure that they work. And Violet's like, oh, I would love to. And he's like, I need someone to read up about Peru and all this stuff about Peru because we're going to be going to Peru. And Klaus is like, well, I need that. And he's like, and I need someone to chop up this rope, this like suitably firm but not too hard, not too soft rope into little chunks. And Sunny's like, I like to bite things, but really she's just like, everything just works out. And he's like, and you know, we'll spend all our time in the reptile room doing fun things, and when we're done, we'll have dinner and go to the movies every night. And you're like, oh, it's just a dream. And then his assistant shows up. Originally, it was supposed to be someone named Gustav, but mysteriously, Gustav sent a letter saying, oh, I suddenly can't be your assistant. And someone new shows up.
Rest in peace, Gustav.
Rest in peace, Gustav.
We barely knew you. We didn't know you at all, but rest in peace. I feel so bad.
Yeah, Gustav was killed by Count Olaf, who
is now posing as Stefano.
Stefano, I am here to be your new assistant, Dr. Montgomery. I am here. I will join you in Peru and help you look after the children. It's Count Olaf in disguise.
Immediately, Klaus is just like, point, Count Olaf! No! Get out of here! And Stefano's like, what? No!
Yeah, Count Olaf literally just grows out a beard and shaves his unibrow. Like, literally, he just took a month to let a beard grow out and then immediately was back on that terrorizing these orphans grind set. Basically, the kids try in various ways to get through to their Uncle Monty that this person is really Count Olaf. And they're trying to wait for a moment alone because basically Count Olaf either, like, negates their attempts.
Them.
Yeah.
He's threatening them with this knife, and he's basically saying, if you tell Uncle Monty about me, I will kill one of you. I'll stab Klaus, or I'll hurt Sunny.
Incredibly efficient threat.
Yeah.
There's a really terrifying scene in this where the kids go to their respective rooms. And
oh, yeah, this is so creepy.
So friggin'. This is one of those things where part of me was reading and I was like, well, I could have maybe read this when I was a kid, but when I reached this scene, I was like, nah, this would have freaked me out. Violet peeks out of her room in the dead of night to see, like, maybe I can, you know, sneak over to Uncle Monty's room and warn him. And at the end of the hallway is just Count Olaf as Stefano, like in the dark, holding the knife out, like letting it hang like the pendulum of a grandfather clock, glinting in the moonlight and just staring down the hallway.
Well, specifically, it's actually his room is in between the kids' rooms and Uncle Monty's room. So in order to reach Uncle Monty's room, she would have to pass by Count Olaf's room, but he keeps his door open, and that's where he's like sitting in his room, basically staring out in the dark to make sure that none of the kids sneak by to talk to Uncle Monty, which begs the question.
When does he sleep?
He does a lot of these things throughout the series.
Like that is like nightmare fuel.
Yeah.
That is like, you know, you're
scary.
A kid at night and you're like, oh, I need my parents. And you like want to go down the hall and like anytime you like turn a corner that's like where it's just darkness beyond, you like quickly rush past that area. Like this is the like primary nightmare version of that. Like, no, you don't just get to run past that dark corner because there's a man with a knife and he wants your money.
Yes.
Eventually, they get one good shot to tell Uncle Monty that Stefano's not to be trusted. And Uncle Monty says, I've had my own suspicions. I think he's actually from the Herpetological Society and he wants to steal all my work.
And then the kids are like, no.
No. And there's a frequent thing that happens that is a double standard. It's common enough in these books that it really hurts, which is that the kids will be told repeatedly it's rude to interrupt when somebody is talking. And when the kids try and say something, they will frequently be interrupted by adults. And just the double standard of it all.
It really grates your gears.
Yeah. Sure enough, that night, the kids are thinking about how to avoid this situation. And come morning, Count Olaf, as Stefano, tells them, you know what, I forget the details of the scene. Basically, he sends them to the reptile room, and in a very haunting, like, pre-dawn sequence where the whole, like, this whole greenhouse-looking thing is awash in, like, a pale blue light from dawn, they find their Uncle Monty slumped in the corner with seemingly a snake bite.
He is pale and bloated, I think.
He's not bloated.
He's not
I think.
bloated.
This is a very important detail because the kids immediately are like, he's a very careful herpetologist. He keeps all of the deadly snakes carefully caged. And they also know that Uncle Monty has vials of venom in his personal stash or whatever as specimens.
Yeah.
And so the kids kind of embark on this mission to try and prove that Uncle Monty did not, in fact, die, but that he was murdered by Stefano.
Yes. Stefano tries to basically take the kids to the ship where they were going to be going to Peru just so he can, like,
He can commit crimes on them without the United States government or British government or wherever they are coming down on him.
yeah. And he crashes headlong into Mr. Poe, who's driving in the opposite direction. Basically, the next part of the book is Mr. Poe and a mysterious doctor who suddenly appears on the scene. The moment they, like, need a doctor because Mr. Poe realizes Monty's dead, this mysterious doctor with very blocky, stiff hands. I wonder if he's Count Olaf's hook-handed stooge from the first book. We won't find that out until the end. Now that there's multiple adults on the scene, they can kind of occupy each other.
Yeah, they just argue with each other while the kids solve the mystery.
Specifically
Yeah.
about the mechanics of who should get in whose car and how should they drive. It's so true to life, though. As a kid, you're at like a sleepover and you're like, Mom, Dad, can I stay the night? Like, you and your friend have mapped out this whole scheme to convince your parents to please let the sleepover happen. And the parents are like, we're going to leave in 5 minutes. And then 2 hours later, they're still talking about the same subject in the kitchen. You're like, it's working perfectly. The plan. They can distract themselves.
Yeah. I have frequently with my friends been like, it's time for me to go home, but I really want to hang out longer. And we're like, we know that our moms are going to just talk for an hour and a half. So that's plenty more time.
And so, sure enough, yeah, Klaus does reading up because the doctor, the fake doctor, says, he must have been bitten by the something deadly snake.
The thing I do find funny is that some of the arguments from the doctor actually get in Count Olaf's way. So even though they're working together at the end, it's revealed, like, the argument probably could have been solved earlier if the doctor had suggested something different.
Yeah.
Which plays into the comedy.
Klaus does the reading and finds out, well, he couldn't have been killed by this snake because this snake, for whatever reason, strangles its victims and throttles them like some kind of boxer.
Yeah, which means that Uncle Monty should have bruises or something going on.
He should be dark and bloated. That's what.
Yeah.
Like, he should be turning purple.
Yeah.
But he's pale. Doesn't make sense.
And Violet puts her engineering skills to use, creating a lockpick to pop the lock on Stefano's suitcase and basically find the murder instruments.
Yeah, they unmask Count Olaf. And Mr. Poe's like, how could this be possible?
Klaus has an aneurysm and screams, because it's Count Olaf!
Poor Klaus.
The doctor's like, I'll arrest him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
like frog march out to the front and then they just book it.
Yeah.
The doctor, who is a man with 2 hook hands, one of Count Olaf's actor stooges, Sunny jumps up and bites the fake hands off, and they go, wait, it's 2 criminals! And the 2 criminals go, yeah, and scuttle out the door.
Yeah.
And that's basically the end of that book. But there's an interesting sort of like post...
Yes, every book has a letter to the editor that Lemony Snicket sends, which usually says, if you would like to know the details of insert name of next book, please meet me at this location with these objects and ask for this person, and you will find my manuscript.
I wonder if any of that worked.
Theoretically, it did. We're getting the books.
We're getting the books. They're happening.
And thus, a pattern is established where kids go to place with Guardian. Guardian's got a thing. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing. Kids face injustice. Count Olaf shows up. Kids are like, that's Count Olaf.
Yes.
Guardians are like, what? Or maybe they were in cahoots with Count Olaf.
Yeah. Sometimes
Depends.
the Guardians are in cahoots with Count Olaf. Uncle Monty is basically the only tolerable Guardian. There's one other upcoming who's also pretty nice, but unfortunately he has a dastardly wife.
Goodness.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
Klaus reads, he remembers something, and Violet invents something, and Sunny bites someone, and they get away.
Well, in upcoming books, sometimes Klaus gets hypnotized at one point,
Whoa.
which means that Violet has to be the one who reads up on things.
That's the one with gum, right?
Yeah, that's at the mill.
I remember that
That's
one.
when we get into child labor.
Their lunch is a stick of gum.
Yeah.
That's what really
gosh.
stood out to me, is that there's just gum everywhere because the employees don't know what to do with it, so they just stick it
And
wherever
the employees
they can.
are paid in coupons. But the coupons are like a
Wow.
buy one, get one free thing. But they're like, but we don't have money to even buy the one thing. So what are we going to do?
I love
And Sunny is a secretary. Because they're like, well, Sunny can't work at the mill. Oh, wait, no. In the austere academy, Sunny becomes a secretary. But in the miserable mill, Sunny does fight someone with a sword, but with her teeth. Like they're having a
gosh.
sword fight, but it's clanging against her teeth. It's hilarious.
I remember loving that book very
Yeah.
much. And then the one before 3, there's like a lot of leeches.
Oh, yeah. So the one after this, they go to Lake Lachrymose to stay with Aunt Josephine, who is this woman who is terrified of everything.
Oh.
Like she won't use the stove because she's scared it'll explode. Kind of terrified. And so they have to eat like cold cucumber soup every day because she will only cook cold,
Ugh.
like
Oh,
she
I
won't
remember
cook
that.
anything because she
Gross.
doesn't want to use the stove. They're kind of like miserable, but at least Aunt Josephine is nice enough and Count Olaf isn't around until he is as a ship captain. And this time he has a peg leg. So yeah, this theme continues frequently where they go somewhere with a guardian. The guardian is either good or bad. Count Olaf shows up. Although Mr. Poe grows increasingly more and more incompetent.
Really?
By the 4th book, he's just so done with sending these kids to their guardians. So he starts just not even going with them to meet the guardian. In books 2 and 3, he goes with them. He meets the guardian. He says, here are the kids. Please take care of them. Watch out for Count Olaf.
They were a burden on him and his
Yes.
impressive banking skills
Yeah,
or whatever.
by book 4, he's gotten a promotion. So he's like, oh, no, I can't go with you kids because I'm going to miss a whole day of work at the bank. And so you must go on alone. And that's the one where they get put into child labor. And then Mr. Poe shows up at the end and is like, why are they working at the mill? Children shouldn't be working. And it's like, if you had just shown up, you would have known. Because immediately they arrive at the mill and this time their guardian doesn't even meet up with them. They just leave them a note saying, you orphans will be working at the mill from now on.
Mr. Poe is the villain of the series. Count Olaf is a force of evil, like a force of nature that everyone in their life must contend with something, a phenomena like this, an evil
Yeah.
force attacking you, assailing you. Mr. Poe is the system that should be protecting you and just can't.
Yeah. He's so much more worried about his career and things that he's personally worried about than about the kids. And he's just like, I just want to get them off my back. I don't want to have to deal with them anymore. He sucks. We are not Mr. Poe fans in this house.
I mean, even in the audiobook version, I did start to get tired of him just because I kept hearing all of that hacking and coughing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, God, I'm trying to eat. What you mentioned, Jino, about Count Olaf being a force of nature is very interesting because I had the thought in book 2, which affords a lot of time to talking about the effects of Monty's sudden death on the kids. Because it talks about, after Monty dies, the fact that the kids, I think more specifically Violet, thinks back to like, what was the last interaction I had with him, with Uncle Monty? And they think back to the night before and how they were so upset with Uncle Monty for not recognizing that Count Olaf was Count Olaf and upset that he was so preoccupied with his own career and perception of things. They were busy trying to figure out, what are we going to do about Count Olaf? And they were upset at Uncle Monty. And even though Uncle Monty's driving them to the movies and trying to make conversation with them afterward, they're just sort of shut off. And they can't remember, or at least Violet specifically can't remember, like what was the last thing I said to him? What was the last thing he said to me?
Did we say goodnight? Did we say thank you?
And that felt so real.
Yeah.
Because, you don't always get closure when it comes to stuff like that. People important to you exit your life and maybe they pass away suddenly or even expectedly, and you don't always get to remember what your last interaction was with them. Lemony Snicket describes it as, when someone like that goes away, it's almost like you're climbing up the steps of a staircase and you think there's one more step than you realize, and suddenly you're left sort of in the lurch and reeling. And I was like, wow, that is so prescient, because when that happens in life, what do you assail? Nothing in many cases, because sometimes death just arrives on your doorstep as a force you can't contend with. But sometimes death is an actor with a beard and a knife and a suitcase full of poison and a fake doctor, and that's a force that you can contend with, and that's a force
you really should be able to contend with if only the Mr. Poe would get around to it.
So in that case, when I was reading like, oh wow, that's very prescient, I was like, wait a minute. Monty didn't just die because of some random accident or anything. He was murdered.
He was murdered.
By a jerk. We can punch a jerk. So it made me hate Count Olaf even more. Because in the first book, we are led to believe in the first book that the fire was a total accident. I don't know if that's really true.
Few things in this book are true accidents.
Victoria's got that evil grin on her face. Like, hee hee hee.
But at the very least, in book one, Count Olaf is a profiteer off of tragedy. We can hate him for all that he's doing, but the stuff that sets up the kids' lives for such despair doesn't originate, as we are led to believe in book one anyway, from Count Olaf. In book two, it is specifically Count Olaf going out of his way to just ruin the lives of these children. Book two, I would say in particular, is when that just absolute despise for this man really cemented itself, because he was absolutely hateful in book one. But book two is where you're on the run from the law. What are you doing? Leave the scene. Stop messing with these kids.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, the Jim Carrey movie adaptation blames Count Olaf directly, immediately, because they give him a giant magnifying glass telescope that's pointed at the mansion. And the kids are like, oh my God, he fired a sun laser beam at our parents' mansion and burned it down.
Oh my gosh.
Can neither confirm nor deny at this point. Maybe in the next episode when we talk about a series of unfortunate events, we'll talk about that. But there's definitely things that are going on, even in their parents' lives, that we do not know about, or at least the kids don't know about. Which I do want to talk about Lemony Snicket. He frequently talks about this great tragedy, his lost love, Beatrice. And I was just curious, Michael, who do you think she is?
I don't know. I got no one to go off of.
Justice Strauss.
It could be. Well, I don't think we know her first name.
Justice. Her profession is just very convenient to her name.
It could be just Strauss. It could be, I don't know, Mrs. Baudelaire, who was immediately dead at the beginning of book one. I don't know. We get one mention of her in the two books that I think we have.
In later books, he starts talking about her a lot.
Wait. No. Well, except because suddenly I'm like, is Lemony Snicket actually their dad and he survived? And then Beatrice was, but...
That'd be wild.
That'd be a bad father.
Yeah.
I'm the father and I'm following them around and writing about them and sending letters to my editor, but I'm not going to speak with them because that would make bad storytelling.
Yeah. I mean, we don't know the timeline. It could be that this Beatrice person died after all of these events occurred to the Baudelaires, or it was before all of these events, right? There's no indication from Lemony Snicket of when she died. We just know that he's very heartbroken and distraught. And sometimes he will take a pause from what's happening to the Baudelaires and suddenly go into his own personal feelings, which I did want to ask, do you guys feel like Lemony Snicket is an unreliable narrator?
I definitely don't trust Lemony Snicket. I think even as a kid, I didn't trust Lemony Snicket. Something's very sinister about this Lemony man.
Because it does present the question of why is this random dude specifically trying to chronicle the events of these orphans? I mean, part of this is it's media intended for kids, so the degree of unreliability in a narrator, I'm less inclined to, as a default, presume. But if there's anything I've learned in the course of this podcast is that you get some wild stories for kids. Either the path that the Baudelaires take in life leads them to such impacting events either within the world or within whatever secret society stuff is going on, that this Lemony Snicket, for whatever his role in this is, has to take notice and has to chronicle this stuff and maybe try and track them down. I was less inclined to think that maybe he's after their fortune as well, if only because he seems so incredibly empathetic.
I'm not necessarily talking about whether or not he's trustworthy. I'm more so talking about the fact that he is writing this story based off of outside observations about the Baudelaires. He's writing this based on reports and third-party accounts. So it is entirely possible that none of the things that the kids say in this book are actually what they said or did.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I already really wanted to read the rest of the series, and I plan to. In like an actionable way, not in like oh, it'd be nice to read the rest. Like, I want to know, but that in particular really makes me go like, okay, these 2 books have done enough with the mind-bendy.
Yeah.
Like, you may affect reality in the way that you want by stopping this book right now and imagining something else. But the idea that it twists again and says everything you've been led to believe is absolute cotton candy. It's fabrication.
What I imagine is probably a lot of these events actually occurred, but the specific details, who's to say? There's also, in the 3rd book, Aunt Josephine often will say, well, you can't believe everything you read. Every book kind of has its own theme. For example, book 4 is about why child labor is bad. In book 3 specifically, it does go into a little bit of, can you believe everything that you read? Because, slight spoiler for Michael, sorry. Aunt Josephine fakes her death, and she writes basically like a suicide note to the kids. Hidden inside the note is like a code. So Lemony Snicket goes into, can you believe everything you read? Because obviously Count Olaf in book 3 is pretending to be this boat captain, and just because he says that his name is what's written on his business card does not mean that he's actually that person. So it's a very interesting commentary on, I guess, media literacy and just literacy in general. There actually is a common theme in these books where generally the more sympathetic characters are the ones who are at least well-read, and then the most despicable characters are, I don't want to say less educated, but
They disregard the importance of books.
yeah.
Cool.
I want a main character in a children's novel to hate books. Where's that?
That's the problem. All the people writing these books like books.
Yeah.
All of this pro-book propaganda.
Woof.
Got a little real there for a second.
Yeah. Tragically.
Unfortunately.
Oh. Remind me, Jino, well, you don't know the exact book that you left off on when you were a kid.
Somewhere between 4 and 8.
So presumably when you were a kid, you enjoyed those books more than your current go-around? Because you said it was rather dour.
I think so. I think the perspective is important because going into it as a kid, going one book at a time, not having any context, it's exciting. I guess the mystery of it, the danger of it, but also you really want these kids to succeed and you see yourself in these kids because it's written in a very like child accurate perspective of the world. And also I was listening to audiobooks to and from school, so I didn't really have a ton of choice.
Oh, okay.
My mom would put them on and we got to listen to these books, kids. Broaden your minds. I must have watched the movie adaptation because I remember parts of it, so I must have been pretty young.
The movie tries to cram all first 3 books into one movie, which was a poor decision.
And it really messes with the order of the books, I believe. Like the play is the last thing to happen.
Oh,
So
really?
the stuff from books 2, I don't remember anything from book 3, but the stuff from the other books goes before the play. So they get to Count Olaf's house, stuff happens, they escape, they come back, and then the play happens, which is interesting. And they also try to like tie in the whole Count Olaf definitely murdered your parents to make him a more comprehensive villain. But they did come out with a video game adaptation that I did play some of. And that's my biggest, most clear core memory of this franchise is the video game adaptation, which is a really strange thing to have. It was like a third-person perspective 3D platformer / puzzle game.
Wow.
Where each of the kids had their own like unique skill set, and like Violet's inventions came into play. There were like boxy jump boots and a grappling hook, but not like the grappling hook that Violet used, like a full-on Batman style grappling hook.
Wow.
And like an
Very
extendo arm
gamified.
grabby. Yeah, very gamified. It was rad as hell.
That sounds great.
And Count Olaf's house was more like a mansion, and there was a level where you went and explored like the ruins of the Baudelaire's like burned down house. There was a dock level. It was pretty sick. I did not
Wow.
finish it.
But you had a good time with
I had
it?
a great time. Mostly watching one of my older cousins play it over his shoulder.
That sounds great.
So this was like an older game then.
Yeah, probably, I don't know, 2010, 12? When did the movie come out? I don't know.
Oh,
The movie
I
came
wouldn't
out in
call that
2004.
Whoa, I was way off. The game must have come out in 2005 then.
The new Netflix adaptation is better. I haven't watched all of it yet, but Neil Patrick Harris is Count Olaf, and he does a great job. Like, he really commits to the character because you really have to in order to be Count Olaf.
Yeah.
I think they also endeavor in the TV series to add more context about the secret society and about Count Olaf's backstory. There is an interesting theme about moral relativity, because later on in the series, the kids will have to make decisions that could be perceived as not being quote-unquote good decisions. People might get hurt because of decisions that they make, etc. It calls you to question, are these characters entirely evil, or are they good characters? Or, like, is it possible for a character to be completely good?
You know what I realized when we were going through these books, when we were reading them? Lemony Snicket is telling me a lot about how this is a series of very unfortunate events. And I was going through and I was like, you know, this is a trick. This is one big trick, a series of unfortunate events. This is storytelling. This is everything I was taught to do in whatever, you know, creative writing classes or film school. The bog standard way you're taught to write a story is your character starts and then you have act 2. And things get real bad in act 2. And they just keep getting bad until you hit act 3. And then you resolve it and then it's done. And I was like, wait a minute. Quote unquote Lemony Snicket, you just took the designs of a normal like 3x structure. I don't want 3x structures loaded. You just took the designs of a normal plot as they're taught to us to write them, of characters in a situation and they encounter higher and higher stakes and greater obstacles, but you dressed it up with all the necessary things to make it absolutely deplorable and branded it as a series of unfortunate events. You took a story and plot structure and you turned it into a gimmick. You mad genius. Because of course any story can be like that, but there's a strong difference between, I don't know, pick your secret agent of choice, your James Bond, and be like, oh no, James Bond is in a real pickle here. He's strapped to a laser machine. What a series of unfortunate events for James Bond. It's like, yeah, but I don't think of it like that. But if you give me 3 orphans and say their family's dead and they have to live with a vile human who wants their money and wants to marry a child, and every time they try and get out of it, it doesn't work out, you're like, oh yeah, that is a series of unfortunate events, isn't it? So I was surprised and impressed because certainly when I was a kid and looked at these books, my thoughts were like, oh, this is grimdark. This is like, and in some ways it still is. It's like every time something good happens or the characters try to do good, reality twists in a way that it's not. And that's true. Even if the books end somewhat sadly, it's like, at least so far, Count Olaf's plot is twisted out from under, and the children are able to move on in some way.
They always have each other.
They always have each other.
It's a sort of arc where you start in a very low place, but not at the bottom.
Yeah.
And then you have a taste of maybe good sometimes, but throughout the book, their position gets lower and lower and lower and lower. And the victory is getting back to where they started. It never improves.
That's
Things don't
true.
get better.
Their parents don't magically come back. They don't get to stay with any guardian. But Count Olaf didn't kidnap them or kill them or anything like that. So
They're
I guess
still alive and mostly in one piece.
Yeah.
And that's a victory in itself.
Yeah.
That's a very good point, because I suppose most stories in that regard, in the reductified example I gave, is more like things start out and they're fine. And by the end, it's like things are better than they were. But like you said, this is actually quite a different iteration. It's like things start out and it's not too great, everyone. And things end and we are right back where we started.
Yeah. It just makes me sad thinking about what's coming up.
Brutal.
And yet we will read them.
And yet I will still read all of that.
I'm serious. I'd be down to read more of these.
Yeah, let's do it.
Ooh, I'm so excited. What will happen? Will Violet invent something? Will Klaus read a book? Will Sunny bite?
Oh, I can't wait for you guys to read more.
I want to know, at what point does Count Olaf push Violet over the edge and she invents an electrified bear trap? that snaps around Count Olaf's little eye ankle and then disintegrates him into dust. At what point does Violet say, enough's enough, we gotta kill this man?
Maybe by the end. Not by electric bear trap, though.
Dang, well,
that's one.
2 stars.
Maybe it's like how a lot of other like old crotchety people are killed off in these books we've read, which is they just fall over too hard. Maybe she invents her most clean invention yet, and it's just a wire over a doorway. And Count Olaf trips and goes, "Arr!" and just hits his head too bad.
Who was everyone's favorite character?
I liked Gustav.
Poor Gustav.
Miss my boy Gustav.
Died in a swamp.
Yeah, worst way to go.
Worst way to go.
Wet.
Yeah, who wants to die soggy?
Yeah.
It's just
Soggy and
uncomfortable.
grimy.
I think I liked Violet out of all the kids the most. Just something about her having to be like the kind of Baudelaire in charge, and
She could definitely grow up and be Batman. 100%. It's all there.
yeah,
Ready to
yeah.
go.
Grappling hook,
Orphan.
Rich.
Rich.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my
Once she turns
gosh.
18, she'll be rich.
Those are the only 3 ingredients you need to become Batman.
This is all to say, by the end of the series, spoiler alert, Violet does become Batman. And that's the end. That's the story. That's how it turns out.
Oh my God, Count Olaf is the Joker. Or the Riddler. Or Clayface, because Clayface transforms into other people.
Clayface is an actor.
And is an actor. Yeah, there. Count Olaf's Clayface.
Klaus would be a good Alfred.
That's so fun. And this is my butler, my younger brother.
Yeah.
And Klaus is like, how did I get here?
Is Sunny Robin?
I think so.
Yeah.
Physical violence.
Yeah. I was still laughing at how he said Sunny's the jock.
She is, though. That's the role she fills in this dynamic.
Oh,
Definitely.
poor Sunny. She's been through so much at such a young age. They made
okay,
her a
she won't remember.
secretary.
It's
She
valuable work experience.
She had to create...
In today's market, you need
Yeah,
that to
that's
get a
true.
job. By the time she graduates, she'll be just experienced enough to be competitive.
On that unfortunate note.
All I have is until next time, don't trust actors.
Yeah.
But also support them in the strike right now.
Oh, yeah, huh?
Yeah.
No, I take it back. No, bad optics. No.
Until next time, I'm Stefano.
Until next time. 7, 6, 7. Bank, money. You got hit, Klaus? And I put you there? Good, get out of here. Good. Punish the child. That's my Mr. Poe impression. I hate him. I hate Mr. Poe.
Thank you for listening to Nostalgia Club. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us on Twitter @_Nostalgia Club and on Instagram @Nostalgia Club Podcast. Leave a comment, give us a rating, and subscribe. You can also send us an email with your suggestions for what we should review next at nostalgiaclubpodcast@gmail.com.
I found this Tumblr poll. It listed all of the Guardians from a series of unfortunate events, and it was like, vote for who you think the worst Guardian is. And, there's been some pretty bad ones, like the ones who, like, forced them into child labor and, but everyone voted for Mr. Poe. It was like 40% votes for Mr. Poe.